In 1600, India accounted for approximately 25% of global GDP, the largest economy on Earth. By 1947, when Britain finally left, India's share of global GDP had fallen to 4%. In the same period, Britain's share rose from 2% to 10%. Economist Utsa Patnaik, using 200 years of trade and taxation data, calculated the total drain of wealth from India to Britain at approximately $45 trillion in today's values. This is not a political argument, it is an accounting exercise. And the numbers are extraordinary. In the early modern era, India's economic landscape was defined by scale, complexity, and technical sophistication. Bengal's river valleys alone supported close to 1 million handlooms, their rhythmic clatter weaving cotton muslin so fine it was prized from London to Istanbul. The textile sector accounted for around 30% of Indian export earnings, with shipments of cotton, silk, and dyed calicos reaching Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Every year, hundreds of thousands of bales left the port of Surat and Hooghly, handled by merchant guilds and financed through a dense network of moneylenders and credit brokers. Agriculture provided the backbone. Wheat yields in the Indo-Gangetic plains reached 1.2 tons per hectare, outpacing many European benchmarks. Irrigation networks, built from bamboo and stone, managed by local administrators, enabled double cropping and sustained a population that supported both rural and urban life. Grain surpluses allowed for a sizable non-agricultural workforce, feeding the textile hubs and merchant cities that dotted the subcontinent. Financial innovation kept the wheels of commerce turning. The hundi, a paper-based bill of exchange, circulated from village markets to the imperial court, offering credit at rates between 4 and 12%, depending on risk and reputation. Merchant bankers like the Jagat Seth family in Bengal and Marwari financiers in the West moved capital across provinces, settling accounts in a matter of months. This indigenous system rivaled the sophistication of European banks, underpinning both domestic trade and international exchange. Port cities such as Surat, Masulipatanam, and Hooghly functioned as gateways to the world. Each year, more than 1 million tons of Indian goods pass through these harbors, with textiles alone making up nearly half the volume. Customs duties collected at these ports contributed directly to imperial revenues, reinforcing the fiscal strength of the Mughal administration. These elements, advanced textile clusters, productive agriculture, and a robust credit system, formed the economic foundation that would soon become the target of systematic extraction. The fiscal machinery of colonial extraction operated through 3 tightly controlled channels, each designed to move Indian wealth into British hands with minimal friction. The first and most direct was land revenue. Tax collectors working from district headquarters gathered payments in rupees from millions of farmers and landlords. These sums, instead of funding local infrastructure or public works, were earmarked for export. A portion was set aside for routine administration, but the majority was converted at the official exchange rate, roughly 15 rupees to £1 and remitted to London. This conversion, managed by the India Office Treasury, ensured that Indian revenues became hard currency deposits in the Bank of England, reinforcing Britain's own gold reserves. The second channel flowed through customs duties. While Indian ports had once collected tariffs to support local governance, under British rule, these revenues were systematically redirected. Customs receipts from key ports like Calcutta and Bombay were pooled and transferred abroad. The process was formalized through the sale of council bills, financial instruments denominated in sterling, issued by the Secretary of State for India, and auctioned in London's money markets. The proceeds funded what became known as the Home Charges, payments for the pensions of British officials, interest on public debt raised in London, and the procurement of military supplies, all debited to Indian accounts but spent overseas. By the 1850s, annual home charges exceeded £3 million, rising to over £30 million by the 1890s. Each year, clerks in the India office recorded these transfers in ledgers, tracking the steady flow of rupee revenues out of India and into British coffers. The system left little ambiguity. Indian tax and trade surpluses were systematically converted, remitted, and absorbed abroad, laying the groundwork for the vast annual drain that would later be quantified and debated by economists like Utsa Patnaik. Utsa Patnaik's calculation begins with a simple proposition. This is not a political argument, it is an accounting exercise. Her method draws on 2 centuries of export surplus data, home charges ledgers, and official customs returns, covering the period from 1765 to 1938. The arithmetic is direct. Each year's export earnings, what India sent abroad minus what it imported, are recorded in pounds sterling, adjusted for the home charges remitted to London. These annual surpluses are then compounded forward at a real interest rate of 5%, a figure Patnaik defends as reflecting the long-run opportunity cost of capital in global markets. The result is a present value sum, £9.2 trillion sterling, or roughly $45 trillion at the historical exchange rate of $4.8 to the pound. Critics have challenged both the price benchmarks and the compounding rate. Some argue that using a 5% real rate inflates the present value, suggesting that a lower rate, 2 or 3%, would yield a total closer to $15 to $20 trillion. Others point to the choice of world commodity prices for Indian exports, questioning whether these reflect what India could have received absent colonial rule. Alternative price series, such as those compiled by Geoffrey Williamson, often produce more conservative results. Still, the empirical foundation remains. The export surplus and home charges are documented in the ledgers of the East India Company and the India Office. The debate, in the end, is about how to interpret the numbers, not whether the transfers occurred. The scale of extraction, even at its lowest estimate, remains staggering, an outflow that would shape the fate of entire sectors and millions of lives. Between 1813 and 1850, the fabric of India's textile economy began to unravel under the weight of British trade policy. Within a generation, Indian cotton textile exports dropped by nearly 40%, falling from £2.3 million to £1.4 million. At the same time, the flow of British-made cloth surged into Indian markets, rising by 300%. These figures are not merely statistical shifts. They signal a deliberate reordering of global trade, engineered through a series of tariff acts that shielded Lancashire's mechanized mills while exposing Indian artisans to relentless competition. Tariffs on Indian textiles entering Britain climbed as high as 85%, with rates of 27% to 59% imposed in the early 1800s, and further increases under the 1813 Charter Act and subsequent legislation. By contrast, British goods faced little to no duty in India. The result was a one-way current. Raw cotton left Indian ports for British factories, while finished cloth returned, undercutting the very weavers who had once supplied the world. In Bengal, the collapse was especially severe. The muslin looms of Dhaka, once renowned for their craftsmanship, fell silent as orders dwindled and wages plummeted. Family account books and merchant ledgers from the period record a steady decline in output, confirming what the trade tables show. The industrial core of Indian society was hollowed out, not by market forces alone, but by policies calibrated to favor Britain's industrial ascent. This forced transition from manufacturing to raw material export left entire regions more vulnerable to economic shocks. deepening the risks that would soon manifest in famine. Revenue. Ledgers from 1770 reveal that even as famine swept Bengal, the East India Company maintained its tax demands. Letters from company officials record shipments of grain leaving the province while the countryside starved. No suspension of revenue occurred. The fiscal machinery continued, indifferent to the scale of loss. The Famine Commission report from 1878 details a similar pattern. Despite widespread crop failure, rice and wheat exports persisted. The commission estimated that between 6 million and 10 million people died in the Deccan and South India. Official correspondence shows colonial administrators prioritizing the maintenance of export surpluses and market confidence over local relief. By the Second World War, the logic of extraction had become entwined with global conflict. In 1943, War Cabinet minutes document the diversion of 500,000 tons of grain from India to support British forces in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. Requests to redirect food to Bengal were vetoed at the highest level. Winston Churchill's own words, recorded in cabinet discussions, reflect a refusal to adjust policy. Even as famine deaths in Bengal climbed into the millions, each of these episodes is documented in the administrative record, not as accidents, but as the predictable outcome of policies that placed imperial priorities above human survival. Dadabhai Naoroji, writing at the turn of the 20th century, was among the first to quantify what he called the drain of wealth from India. His estimate, an annual outflow of £200 million, became a rallying point for early nationalists and a reference for later economic analysis. Naoroji's calculations, based on trade balances and the costs of colonial administration, anticipated later arguments that this persistent outflow not only impoverished India, but also fueled Britain's own capital formation. Modern research links as much as 10 to 15% of Britain's 19th century investment stock to capital originating from India. The question of reparations has since moved from nationalist pamphlets to international policy debates. Proposals have ranged from direct financial compensation to the creation of development trusts, but practical barriers remain formidable. Statutes of limitations, the difficulty of tracing individual losses, and the absence of a legal framework for historical claims all complicate the matter. Still, the ethical argument persists that recognition of the drain is a matter of restorative justice, not simply of accounting. Today, the legacy of extraction is visible in the global distribution of wealth. World Bank figures show that the top 10% of the world's population now holds 76% of global wealth, while countries of the global south, including India, account for a fraction of that total. The debate over reparations is, at its core, a debate about responsibility, how to acknowledge the economic aftershocks of empire in a world still shaped by its consequences. Today, the enduring legacy of colonial extraction is not just a matter of historical record. It is inscribed in the persistent global disparities in wealth. As debates over reparations and economic justice intensify, the numbers remain contested, but the arithmetic of empire continues to shape our world in real, measurable terms.